Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to get started in just a moment. We expect a few more people, but we can start with some introductions. My name is Anna Miskolta. I am the Director of Community Resilience at Thrive Alliance of Nonprofits, and I lead our community organizations Active in Disaster, our COAD. And we're really thankful to St. Bernard Parish. We have several staff on the call that are going to give this training today on disaster recovery. They're going to go over a lot of great subjects. We had the Spanish version of this yesterday, and I was amazed. I think this training is super, super helpful for the situation that we're in San Mateo County and also in our neighboring counties as well. So I hope that this is helpful for everyone on the call to convey this information back to communities and other organizations. So with that, I think we're going to do some self-introductions. Could I have Claire or Mackenzie? Would one of you guys want to go first?
Sure. My name is Mackenzie Winninghoff. I am SVP Share Associate. We'll talk a little bit more about each of our programs later, but our Share program works to build capacity for local organizations. And one of the things that we do is provide trainings like what we're doing today. And I'll be one of the presenters. Claire?
Hi, my name is Claire Balsley. I'm director over our disaster assistance program, which helps survivors access additional funds from FEMA through appeals. And that's going to be the main focus that I present on later today.
I just wanted to shout out, we do have a couple of other Thrive staff on the call. Kirsten and Yahira are here. I think they're here to both listen and to support, but I'm also hoping we can just do a quick round of introductions. We have a small enough group here. If you want to just say your name and your organization, you can go ahead and come off mute. Lucy, would you like to start? In case you are talking, we can't hear you.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. We're just going to do a quick round of introductions just so we know who we have in the room.
Oh, so sorry. My name is Lucy. I'm from Dalama for Tongans, and I wanted to join this this training because I think it's a need in our community, the Pacific Islander community, and one that we don't know how to necessarily help with or access. So this is a great start for me to learn.
Thank you, Lucy. Chanel?
Hello, I am Chanel. I work for Peninsula Family Service. We're a private nonprofit organization in downtown San Mateo. I'm facilities manager here, and it's always helpful to take these kind of trainings to kind of just refresh your memories. And with all the crazy stuff going on in the world, you know, we have a child care center here, and you know, so we just want to make sure that we're keeping staff and the children safe. So this is going to be really helpful for us. So that's why I'm taking the training.
Thank you, Chanel. Irma?
Hi, I'm Irma Rodriguez. I run South Coast Sustainable, which is a climate resilience community-based organization in the unincorporated parts of San Mateo County. So that's Pescadero, Loma Mar, La Honda area that got hit pretty hard with those our recent storms. So I'm very, very grateful for this training.
Jeremy, would you like to go next? You can also skip down to Julie if Jeremy isn't ready. Julie, hi.
Sure. Hi, I'm with Bellhaven Action, and I'm here because Menlo Park just lost power, some people for 3 days, and it struck a chord. We've been talking about resilience and emergency planning, but our city and too little too late. So we want to be ready for the next round of things. Thanks.
Marisol?
Thank you. I had to look for my cursor there. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marisol Escalera Durrani, and I'm here just to listen and learn, and I'm from Supervisor Ray Mueller's office, District 3.
Maya?
Hi, I'm Maya. I work with Climate Resilient Communities. I'm a fellow. We're a community-based organization that works in the communities of East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Bellhaven in the areas of climate resiliency and adaptation planning. So this is really relevant to the work that we do. And we're also planning to, I think, deliver the same or similar training to our communities in the coming weeks, because we experienced a lot of, issues when, as Julie mentioned, the power outages happened in Menlo Park and then a few weeks earlier with the floods. So I think it's really important to know this information and to pass it on to our communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Maya. I saw some new people join. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sarah Polgar. I'm with the San Mateo Resource Conservation District. And so we do a lot of work with the landowners, primarily on the coast side. And so obviously there was quite a bit of work with the recent floods. And so I'm here also to listen and learn about this and see how it might be, how we might be able to bring some of this to benefit some of the landowners we've been working with.
Sarah. Benjamin?
Just had to get off mute. This is Ben McMullen, CID San Mateo. We've been involved working with the PG&E shutoffs for quite some time, delivering resources to people with disabilities that need power packs to charge their AT equipment, DME. From there, when the storms came, earlier this year, we also delivered resources. Believe we arranged hotel stays. I kind of serve as backup for this, so that's why it's a little spotty. Arranged for hotel stays, etc., for the same population we served the first go around. But and so I'm excited to be part of this group, just to pull networks and see how we can all work together to make relief happen for the residents of San Mateo County. Thank you.
Thanks, Benjamin. Have I missed anyone for introductions? Or Jeremy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm with PARCA. I'm here, like many people, to listen and learn and try and engage the population I work with to be able to prepare themselves for the inevitable.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourself. We have a great diversity of organizations in the room. I think we're all San Mateo County here, and potentially some that work across county lines. So I think that just gives St. Bernard Parish a good idea of who's here, and I hope we have time for a good discussion and Q&A at the end. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mackenzie and Claire so we can get going. Thank you.
All right, hello. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. It says that the host has disabled screen sharing on my end.
Let's try to fix that. Kirsten, would you mind looking into that?
Yeah, I'm fixing it right now. You should be able to share now.
Okay, can everybody see now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Mackenzie. Like I said, I am SVP Share Associate. I've been with SVP for about 4 years now. I started as an AmeriCorps member in Puerto Rico, working on the recovery for Hurricanes Maria and Irma before I moved to Florida to continue similar work with Hurricane Michael. And now I work with a variety of organizations across the country that are responding to all kinds of different disasters. And our main mission in my department, in the share department, is to help build capacity. A little bit more about what SVP does. Our overall mission is to shrink the time between disaster and recovery. We do this in 5 different ways. One of the ways is through our rebuild program. So we have sites in Texas, Louisiana, Florida, Puerto Rico, the Bahamas that are actually rebuilding and repairing homes that were damaged by storms, mostly hurricanes, day in and day out with the help of AmeriCorps members and volunteers. We also have the SHARE program, which is what I'm a part of. We provide training similar to what we're doing today. And we also work to provide grants for response and recovery. And in some cases, we're able to actually share AmeriCorps members to help build the capacity of these hyperlocal community organizations that are serving their community. We also have a prepare intervention that works before, during, and after disaster to help ensure that homeowners are more resilient to the storms that are coming, whether through training, increasing the procurement of flood insurance and other programs. We also have an advise intervention that works with local government leaders to ensure that the policies that are available or coming out are best created to fit the needs of the populations they're serving. And we also work to advocate for the populations that we know are vulnerable to disasters or have already been impacted by disasters. All within this overall mission of shrinking the time between disaster and recovery for survivors like those in the communities that you're serving. So today, for the first portion of this presentation, we'll be covering what to expect during the response and recovery process. We'll be covering some basics of mold suppression, and then we'll also be going over avoiding contractor fraud, because unfortunately that becomes very prominent in that post-disaster phase of recovery. Before we get into those topics, I did want to highlight a few resources that are available to California right now. The first is going to be legal services. Bay Area Legal Aid will help any survivors specifically navigate any legal issues that they're having. So in some cases, this could be renters that are having difficulties with their landlords that aren't maybe upholding the agreements that they originally were signed to do. And it also could be, maybe helping or assisting with fraud or insurance concerns. There's also going to be some flood insurance support. So United Policy Holders, which I believe is actually California based, they have a California specific resource page available for insurance holders for both homeowner and flood insurance. And then there's also going to be floodsmart.gov, which is this bottom arrow in our bullet point. That's going to be for the National Flood Insurance Program for anyone who has that insurance and needs to submit under their policy for payment, or is just interested in getting more information on that program. These are also the disaster recovery center locations that are available right now in California. However, this is not comprehensive. There are some others, and you can find those on FEMA's website. Here at these sites, if you're not familiar with them, you can get more information on recovery resources. You can apply to FEMA and up until the deadline. And you can also speak with individuals there who are familiar with the disaster and all the different resources that will be available to you. You can ask any questions that you might have as well. So moving into the response to recovery timeline. This is a graphic that has been provided by FEMA. And it essentially covers all of the different elements from the federal perspective that will happen before, during, and after disaster. So we know the first little green tab over here, we know that preparedness is ongoing. It needs to be focused on before disaster, but we can never stop working on preparedness, because we know that these areas that are vulnerable to disaster, unfortunately, disasters don't take a break. As I think we're seeing in California right now, there's been these compounding storms after storms. I know there's lots of snow coming through, lots of rain coming in the coming weeks. And so these risks will continue to happen. And so the government works to continue preparedness before and then in the short-term, intermediate, and long-term time periods following the disaster to ensure that those that are vulnerable continue to be prepared and continue to be as resilient as possible to these disasters. Once the disaster actually happens, immediately in the short term, which is typically the days following the disaster, it will likely become a federally declared disaster. And if it does, in FEMA individual assistance, housing grants, Small Business Administration loans, and the National Flood Insurance Program will begin making payments and taking applications for survivors. This will continue for weeks into the months, so that will continue into the intermediate phase of the recovery process before those eventually close. All of the information that is collected during the application process for the FEMA individual assistance, for the SBA loans, for the National Flood Insurance Program, everyone who raises their hand during that time and says, hey, I need help, all of that information is compiled and ultimately informs the amount of funding your community will get through that long-term recovery grant, which is the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funds. Those will come years typically after the disaster. I think that typically won't see them until 2-3 years after. They do take a little bit of time to fully get that program to the community and for dollars to begin to be dispersed to survivors and organizations serving the community. But this is kind of like an overall look of how these different funds will start to be dispersed to your community throughout the period of time that is the disaster recovery process.
Mackenzie, can I ask a quick question? I heard you say that there's like this period of time which essentially you raise your hand and say, we're going to need help. And that's not this like where you're applying. That's kind of before that to determine how much help will get assigned to that area. Is that what I understand? So from the time the disaster happens, and then when people can begin to start applying to FEMA. So it's really that when survivors are applying to FEMA for the individual assistance, that's like kind of when they're raising their hand and saying, hey, like I need help, or like people are applying to the public assistance and the communities are saying, hey, we need help here. That's really when like the federal government can start to really understand what the needs are in the community based off of the information that come in through the FEMA application process. And Claire, you can step in if that's not correct. But I think we're good.
Yeah. So we're sorry, I had to attend to a fire. We're talking about the initial critical needs assistance or the 60 days to apply to FEMA.
How the amount of people who apply to the FEMA individual assistance inform the amount of funds that eventually come down through the Community Development Block Grant.
Oh yes, 100%. So HUD funds, CDBG-DR funds, this Community Development Block Grant funds, is directly correlated to FEMA awards. So nationally, the average denial rate within FEMA is anywhere between 60 to 87% for survivors who apply for assistance. The national average award amount that survivors receive is $3,380. We'll talk a bit more about how much, the maximum award amounts FEMA provides, but in California right now, it's $41,000. So if you think most survivors who are eligible initially with FEMA only receiving a national average of $3,300, it's really low. And HUD bases how much long-term recovery funds on what FEMA provides. So it's vitally important for us to A, make sure as many survivors as possible are applying to FEMA, and then B, as many survivors as possible are appealing FEMA for additional funds, because then your community will have most likely more assistance from HUD in those Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funds. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, and maybe later we could talk a little bit more about the appeal process.
We definitely will.
I found it very demoralizing.
Oh, it is. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I believe like the last, I think, honestly, like the 75% of this presentation will be about FEMA appeals. So hopefully it will get lots of questions answered there. Outside of like the federal recovery process, there's going to be recovery and response activities happening within your community, which I'm sure that you have been seeing. So now that we're past 30 days and you're past those initial days, you're past those initial weeks, and you're moving into the months, you've already seen that those immediate response activities are going to include search and rescue and restoration of critical lifelines such as electricity, water. Debris removal is going to start, although depending on the community, that may take longer than that initial response period. Muck and gutting will continue if it was a water-based event, so flooding like it was in California. Houses are going to be, we're going to start taking out all of the materials that got wet, the drywall, everything like that, and that's going to be brought out and included in that debris removal. Sheltering for individuals that are displaced or can't return home yet. And then damage assessment. So at the response phase is when the community, the local government, even the state government starts to really understand what the impact of this disaster was and what it's going to take to move into that recovery process. At this point, like I mentioned, FEMA public assistance and individual assistance will become available for application. Small business administration loans will also become available for survivors, and state and local funding opportunities will arise. And so it's really important at this time to start to pay attention to what opportunities, like grant opportunities, funding opportunities, your county government or your state government are starting to release, because they will have funds coming down to them that will either be available for homeowners or for community organizations to start the cleanup process and start maybe some initial response, such as muck and gutting, tarping, things like that. Volunteers are going to be coming to your area, as I'm sure you saw, whether they're from the state or from outside of the state. And a lot of these volunteers will be working with voluntary organizations active in disaster, otherwise known as VOADs, many of which will probably be local to your state, but there's also going to be, like the Team Rubicons, the Samaritan's Purse, all of these VOADs that are, national organizations that come to these areas immediately in that response phase to start, taking trees off of houses and things like that. We're also going to have long-term recovery groups, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but these are LTRGs, and these typically are organized by county. Sometimes counties will group together and form one or, some sort of coalition, and together they'll work to start planning recovery activities for their community, organizing, different nonprofits that are in the area. Additionally, philanthropic donations will begin to come in that immediate phase following the disaster, and this will continue through the recovery phase and will help to ensure that nonprofits can continue to serve their community, as well as like other faith-based organizations. After that initial response, you'll start to transition into recovery, which I believe is probably where the California communities are moving into right about now. So if individuals were displaced or their home is no longer livable, they're starting to try to identify temporary housing that they can live in while their home, is repaired or while they figure out what they're going to do next. And some minor house repairs are going to be able to be started now as well. So this is past that initial muck and gut and mold remediation phase for some survivors, and for others, maybe they're just getting started on that. So housing repairs in this response to recovery phase can look very different depending on the survivor and the means that they have available to them. Larger scale infrastructure repairs will begin now. So rather than, just like working on restoring electricity, they're going to try to make sure that it's actually like fixed and resilient to the next storm, or at least they'll start putting in the plans to do that. And we'll also work on economic revitalization. So this will help get survivors back to work, ensure that they have income coming in, but also ensure that the county, the state, doesn't fall into like an economic troubles, because that will, the stronger the economy of the impacted area, the better able it will be to recover. So it's important that during that response to recovery phase, they start working on that revitalization. FEMA public assistance will continue to be available. However, individual assistance will start to close around this time period. State and local funding opportunities will continue to come out. Volunteers, VOADs, LTRGs continue to support their community, perhaps in different capacities. So rather than muck and gutting, rather than debris removal, they might start moving into, repairing roofs, or they might move into, actual construction in the home, or, painting different things. So the type of activities these organizations are doing might look different. However, they still will be present in your community and will most likely be funded by these philanthropic donations. The long-term recovery, really the main thing that's different here is we'll start to move into mitigation and resiliency measures that will help to ensure that the community is recovered and returned back to how it was before, but not only that, that it's stronger against future storms. So this is in the years following the disaster. We have operating sites that are working on the recovery process for Hurricane Harvey, which will be, I believe, 6 years this year. So recovery can last as long as the community needs in order for survivors to all have like their clear path forward to recovery. The other thing that'll be different in this long-term recovery process will be the HUD Community Development Block Grant for disaster recovery, which Claire and I were talking about just a few moments ago, and that will come out for that long-term recovery period. And otherwise, again, state and local funding, volunteers, philanthropic donations will continue to support this process. Does anybody have any questions about this area? Okay. So we'll just move into some basics about mold suppression. So generally speaking, mold is something that I think we're all kind of naturally concerned about. However, I think it's important to not cause too much panic after disaster and make sure that everyone understands what is mold and what is mildew. So that way you're not going through this whole process of mold suppression, you know, if it isn't mold, but also so you're not like underrating it and it really is a problem that could be affecting your health. So unlike mildew, mold grows on and below the surface of materials. So like drywall or wood, you might be able to like get it off the surface level, but you won't know, but it could potentially be behind that object or that surface. And so unlike mildew, which, you know, really just grows on the surface level, it can be treated fairly easily and it typically won't grow back. Mold cannot be treated with bleach. I think that's like our number one thing that we want to get across in this section is that mold cannot be treated with bleach. It will maybe take it off the surface level, but it will not kill it and it will come back and it most likely will not get below the surface. So in order to make sure you're killing off the mold, to make sure you're like permeating the entire surface of the area that's impacted by mold, you want to use a fungicide. 2 brands that we use in our operating sites and that we recommend are Shockwave or Concrobium. And these are available on, you can order them on Amazon, have them delivered. You can also go pick them up at Home Depot or Lowe's, and they're fairly accessible. If you're looking to take on the mold suppression work by yourself, we believe that homeowners can handle this project, or renters, or, you know, any disaster survivor can handle this project on their own fairly easily. It's also possible, you know, like if there's like a neighborhood, like a whole street, you know, needs to work on this project, you can also like get neighbors together. And a lot of times voluntary organizations can also help with this particular process. It takes between 2 to 5 days. It really depends on the amount of area that's impacted by the mold, the size of the home, and like, you know, really the extent of the issue. And of course, the amount of people you have working on the project. It should cost between $500 to $700. However, some of these materials that we have priced into this like estimate, you might already have. So, you know, some of like the hand tools that you might need to get nails out and different things that we'll get into in a moment, you might already have some of that stuff laying around. You might already have some of the cleaning supplies and maybe you already have gloves and goggles at home. So that $500 to $700 is aiming, I think, high, and that's assuming that you don't have anything that you need to get started. One thing that we do want to highlight is that we suggest that the area should be less than 20% wet via a moisture meter. We don't expect everyone to go out and buy a moisture meter. And one of the things that we do suggest is maybe, again, like if it's a street, if it's a neighborhood, or if it's a community organization helping a specific neighborhood, then maybe you buy like 1 or 2 and you share it throughout the group, because really you're only going to need it at the beginning and at the end of this process. So it really doesn't make sense to have everybody go out and buy one of these. So that's just like something to keep in mind. One other thing to highlight on here is that if the insulation did get wet, you want to make sure that you remove it to at least a foot above the water line, because insulation kind of has water travel through it like paper. So if it starts at the bottom, it'll work its way up. And so it's important that you cut that off a foot above the water line to ensure that where you stop is completely dry. These are just some quick mold suppression steps. The first 4 are really just like preparation activities. So you want to identify and address the water source. So if it's the roof is leaking or there's a window that was broken that's allowing water to end up inside the house, you want to find a way to address that. And it doesn't have to be a long-term repair. It really just needs to be something that'll stop the water from coming in. So it could be as simple as tarping the roof, boarding up the window, because we know that not everyone's going to have the ability to quickly redo their entire roof or replace the window. But this will allow you to get into the house, start the mold suppression, and like limit the spread of the mold. So it's not a much larger project later on. Number two, isolating the work area. Really, we only recommend that if there's only one area of your house that's been impacted by mold. So if it's just one room because the window's broken and mold's only in there, then we recommend that you isolate that area with plastic sheeting, cover the vents, and then get to work. But if your whole house flooded and there's been water damage throughout, likely there's mold throughout, isolating the work area is a little bit less necessary because the main reason we do this is just to stop the spread of the mold spores throughout the house. If they're already there, I wouldn't recommend taking the time and the materials to isolate the different work areas. We recommend that you wear respirators consistently throughout the project and for 24 hours after applying the fungicide to the impacted areas. And we also recommend that you clear the nails and the staples. Of course, not any vital nails and staples that are like holding the house together, but any nails or staples that might be in the different beams that are kind of just like sticking out because water could get into those areas. So if you pull them out, you'll be able to get the fungicide in all the little like curves and ensure that there's no mold hiding behind there. Once all of that's done, you can begin treating the framing of the home. So you're going to do that with 3 steps. You're going to scrub it with a metal wire brush, like side to side, up and down in circular motions to really make sure that you like disturb any of like the mold and that's growing there and like really like start to like break it down. And then you're going to spray it with the fungicide. Once you spray it, you're according to the bottle, the product you end up using, it'll tell you like how long to leave it on there. Once you're done with that, you're going to want to wipe it down. We recommend marking different things, like marking these based off of like what you've done. So once you spray it, typically we recommend that you mark that area with an X. And then once it's been wiped down, you mark it with like a circle around the X or different things like that. So that way you don't like waste material, do things in 2 different, like do anything twice. And that way, if you're working with multiple people, they know like, okay, well, I'm supposed to be wiping and this area is ready to be wiped. And it's just very clear. And that way you don't miss anywhere either, which is the most important part. Once everything's been wiped down, you can go ahead and vacuum everything. We recommend that you vacuum everything 3 times. And this is just to like pick up any debris that might be left on the framing, as well as get any like residual mold spores. If you don't have power, it's okay to like not be able to do this part because the most important part is that fungicide should be killing all of the mold spores. However, we do recommend this step, but understand it's not always possible, not always practical in that post-disaster phase. Next, disposing of any mold contaminated items. We recommend putting them in black contractor bags and like taping them shut. Again, do what you can with the means and like materials that you have in that post-disaster phase. Most important part is getting that fungicide on the impacted area. And then drying out completely. You can turn on fans, you can turn on your heat, you can open windows, whatever it is that you have available. However, if you don't have electricity at the moment, or you can't turn it on safely, leaving your windows open and just paying attention to the weather, making sure it's not raining, closing the windows when it is raining, is one way to be able to dry this area out without electricity available in your home. Any questions there? Okay. We also have a guide online that goes into more detail about our mold suppression process and gives you like a whole materials list and everything like that. And you can find that on sppprotects.org, or we have a Start Here page. Either way, you'll be able to find it on our website. And the last part, Irma?
Yeah, just a quick question on that. If you are organizing a team of volunteers to go in and help a homeowner with mold suppression, how do you protect yourself from any liability, either from a volunteer that maybe gets sick or, has an injury, or from doing something to the homeowner's house, like, you're moving removing staples or you're tearing out, you know, what you think is bad insulation. Is there something that we should be concerned about there, or?
So two different things. So we would have probably both individuals sign a waiver. So all of our volunteers sign a waiver saying that they recognize like the type of work that they'll be doing and like are assuming the risks of that, and that that we provide them with this PPE that they are to wear in order to be able to do this activity safely. And if, you know, they choose not to wear the PPE, you know, we can remove them from the site and different things like that. Because with this proper PPE on, with the respirator, everything, like there really shouldn't be too much risk to the volunteer. So I would say sign the waiver, ensure that they have the PPE available to them, make sure they acknowledge that they have it available to them, and then, you know, take them off site if they're not wearing it properly would be the best way that I would handle that. As for the homeowner, again, waivers, we always have, especially when you're having volunteers do work, we have our homeowners sign a waiver that acknowledges that we are volunteers doing this work. We are not professional mold suppressors or mold remediators, and that we are going to follow like this standard protocol. We're going to remove to a foot above the water line. These are our steps. If you explain that to them, explain your process, they sign off on it, giving you permission to do this, acknowledging what it is you plan to do. That's typically how we work to cover ourselves when working with volunteers in homeowners' houses. Something else that has come up is that sometimes insurance companies will require that they have a mold, like a professional mold remediation team come out or a mold suppression team come out. And it's important, again, to put in that waiver that this will not most likely qualify for anything that's required by your insurance company, because again, you're not certified, you're not qualified, and this will likely do the job. But you know, an insurance company might not recognize it and they might have to have somebody else come out later on.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's really, really helpful.
Alrighty, so moving into avoiding contractor fraud. So this is a very important part of the presentation because unfortunately we see this way too often, whether it's in the days after the disaster or in the months and years following disaster, we continue to see this happening. And really, a lot of times contractor fraud can be minimized if individuals and survivors are informed. Maybe they have an advocate if they're, you know, part of like a vulnerable population, maybe they're older or elderly. There's lots of ways to like work to inform the community to ensure that these unfortunate circumstances do not happen and these contractors are not able to continue to take advantage of our survivors. So first, we work to like the ways that contractor fraud can happen is either contractors will take the money and disappear, they'll charge above a fair market rate, they won't do work to code or to the proper policies, they won't get permits, they won't have licenses. And then the work that they might just do overall is like low quality or incomplete. And a lot of times they disappear, you can't ever get in contact with them again, and there's not a lot of ways to do follow-up. So in order to kind of like help protect yourself or your community against contractor fraud, you want to make sure that you do like your research first, whether it's talking to your friends and neighbors, whether it's talking to local construction or building associations, consulting the Better Business Bureau. There's also a website, which I have linked in another slide, where you can actually search up a contractor's license number. You can search their business and see through the California like state website whether or not it's a legitimate business that's recognized in California. Another way to kind of get an idea of whether or not these contractors are legitimate is to get at least 2 written estimates. So that way you can compare them side by side. And if one is like $15,000 more, $15,000 less, like, and it's got exactly the same work for exactly the same rooms, then you know there might be a concern there. Another major tip is never to disclose the amount that you got from your insurance company to your contractor. They don't need to know that information. They have no rights to that information. And if you tell them you have $50,000, likelihood is you're going to get a quote for $50,000 or, you know, $51,000. So that is not information that you have to tell them, and they should be working for your business and giving you a competitive quote that is, you know, fair to you. Other warning signs to look out for is if a contractor is soliciting door to door, if they're not willing or don't have ID, licensing, or insurance that they can provide you with when asked, if they don't provide estimates in writing, if they want cash payment or full payment, Those are all warning signs because all of those things make it a lot harder to track that person should they decide to, take the money and run, or just, stop answering your phone calls without any sort of written estimate, without any record of check or electronic payment. It's going to be a lot harder to figure out who that person is and hold them accountable. Another thing that we recommend, and here's the contractor license verification link that I mentioned, is to make sure that you know your licensing and permit needs. So if you know that your roof is going to need a permit and you're getting your roof replaced, you can make sure to ask the contractor for proof that they pulled that permit. You can ask for proof that the permit is closed and that it was approved, or following the completion of your work before you give that final payment. There's lots of different ways you can protect yourself if you know exactly what steps that contractor should be taking. And here's the phone number you can call to check contractor licenses, and you can also do it online. You can actually just Google like California contract license verification, and this is like one of the first links that come up. Throughout the process of working with the contractor, you're going to want to make sure that you have a clear idea of what they've committed to doing. And by doing that, you'll have like a detailed scope of work and schedule. So by next week, Wednesday, the flooring is supposed to be done. And if you go to check on that progress and the flooring's not done, you have a clear written expectation, and you can kind of like hold them accountable to that. Dividing your payments up into milestones. So, paying quarterly or paying in thirds or paying in halves can help ensure that you have the power basically to ensure that the contractors continue to work on schedule and continuing to hold up his end of the deal. And we also recommend that you never give that last payment until the work is fully complete. There's a warranty or home inspection, and you know that that original contract has been upheld into a quality standard. If you ever have any concerns, we recommend that you halt work immediately, hold any payments, and wait until you are comfortable with the work proceeding and that all issues have been resolved. And from there on out, any concerns that you have with the contractor, you can always report to like the local Chamber of Commerce or the Better Business Bureau, and that will kind of put a hold on that contractor's ability to open any new permits. One last thing on this topic is if you ever do experience contractor fraud, it is incredibly important that you file a claim with the police, and that you also file a claim like with your local entity that manages like contractor licensing. One, because this ensures that contractor cannot commit any more fraud to other members in your community. But two, if a couple years down the line you decide you want to apply for assistance, maybe with a nonprofit or another agency, and they ask for proof of your insurance, and you say, I got $75,000 from my insurance, but I wasn't able to complete any work with that. The more documentation you have to advocate for yourself and show that you truly were a victim of contractor fraud through those police reports, through the forms that you submit to that local county agency or state agency where you reported the contractor to, will help work in your favor to ensure that you're able to receive that additional assistance that you might need. Does anybody have any questions here? All right, perfect. I will go ahead and hand it over to Claire. Should any other questions come up, you can reach the SHARE team at partner@sbpusa.org. Anna also has all of our contact information, so you can also reach out to her and she will be able to get you in contact with us. But I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen and hand it to Claire. Thank you all.
Thanks, Mackenzie. One thing I want to make abundantly clear when I am providing this presentation, it's not something that I just want to stand at my podium and speak. It's a lot of information that you may or may not have already heard, depending upon how often you have worked with FEMA. So I want you to interrupt me. I want you to shoot messages in the chat. Happy to pause at any point. Right now, my team and I have been assisting over 400 survivors across 5 disasters in filing over 500 appeals. And we have close to a 67 to 70% appeal success rate. If you were able to log on when I was talking about the CDBG-DR funds, you heard these high denial rates and heard the really low award amounts. My team has helped survivors on average access close to $7,800 in additional FEMA funds. So we have a good amount of knowledge. We started our program at the end of 2021 and really want to share all the things that we've learned with you today. And that's why I'm here. And that's why Mackenzie has been presenting everything about recovery outside of FEMA. But again, lots of information we're going to cover today, and I really want you to interrupt me. So let's talk about types of assistance that are available. First, we have insurance. This is one of the main types of assistance that we hope survivors have available to them, but we understand that very few individuals have the means in which they can afford insurance. But if they do have insurance, really want to delineate what is covered. With homeowners insurance or renters insurance, most homeowners or renters insurance do not cover flooding unless it was caused by some roof damage and the rains came in and caused some water damage within the house. If it was something like the Pacific Ocean waters or the river waters, or the dams had opened up and waters had flown into survivors' homes, that would require flood insurance. And being in California, I'm a California resident myself, not something we really think about having to have on hand. We think about fire insurance, but not so much flood insurance. So there may be many survivors that you work with who do not have flood insurance, but have flood damage. Now, there could also be things that insurance does not cover, such as rental assistance or any other thing that we might not think of. If insurance only covers the structure of the home, but maybe not the property within the home, that we could rely on FEMA with, right? So insurance is the main focus of where survivors can receive their maximum funds. Most of the time, depending upon what the coverage limits and terms or coverages, survivors can hopefully bring their home back to that pre-disaster condition. So any questions just on this really quick run through of insurance before I move on? Right. Few things to note. And I'm sure it's very likely that as you're working with survivors, this will be their first time even filing a claim. Want to make sure they do so ASAP. Also want to make sure, very important, that even if they have insurance, they apply to FEMA. The reason being, their insurance might not provide them with the funds that they're expecting, or it might not cover everything that they're expecting. So we want to get a FEMA application started the same time an insurance claim is filed. If a survivor waits too long, they're going to exceed the application window with FEMA. And then it's going to be so much harder to get FEMA assistance. So file a claim and apply to FEMA. You can get written estimates from contractors, highly recommended. Don't settle without really feeling comfortable with that insurance settlement. So work with that claims adjuster. Keep all copies of communication. If this claims adjuster is really lowballing and you feel a pressure to really settle, there are other organizations that were previously mentioned, and we can send a follow-up that really help with insurance. There's a nonprofit organization called United Policyholders. They help homeowners who are having a hard time with insurance and advocating for additional funds from insurance. I also highly recommend utilizing pro bono disaster legal aid organizations in this instance, especially if there is some really difficult pushback from insurance, or if insurance really is dragging their feet. This I'm going to state for insurance and for all things FEMA: spend settlement money only on repairs and damaged items as allocated by the insurance company, or for instance, as allocated by FEMA. Anna had just placed some information in the chat, which I highly recommend you take a look at. So moving on to FEMA, I think it's the main topic that everyone's interested in from what I'm speaking on. FEMA covers what is not met by insurance. Okay, so what we want to see from our survivors is a declaration page. We want to see that declaration page of the insurance to understand right away what will not be covered. Because when we're applying to FEMA, if we know 100% that insurance will not cover rental assistance, we could present that document to FEMA when we're applying. And we can say, hey, we're definitely going to need rental assistance because it's not safe for our survivor to live in their home and they need to live somewhere else temporarily. So without even waiting or needing to appeal for rental assistance, we can automatically try to get that ball rolling. Now, if a survivor has insurance, what will likely happen is FEMA will automatically deny the survivor of assistance. We're going to talk about this in a little more detail, but they're going to deny him assistance because they want to avoid duplication of benefits. They want to make sure they want to know how much money insurance has provided for each scenario: housing assistance, home repair or replacement, or other needs assistance, or rental assistance. So they don't want to duplicate those benefits. Additionally, if a survivor has insurance, but they receive, let's say, a settlement of $20,000, just using an example, they receive a settlement of $20,000 for home repair, but they have damages that exceed that $20,000. Because the home repair assistance, the housing assistance for FEMA, has a maximum grant award of $41,000, we could then appeal to FEMA for additional assistance since the $20,000 is less than the $41,000 that FEMA can allocate, right? So let's pretend, for instance, this survivor has $100,000 worth of damage. We could appeal to FEMA saying we've received $20,000, but we have $100,000 worth of damage, and then FEMA could provide a balance between the $20,000 and the $41,000. So if that survivor is lucky enough, FEMA could provide that survivor with an additional $21,000 worth of assistance. Okay, so that's what it means by FEMA covers disaster needs not met by insurance. And I want to break down really quickly the different types of assistance that FEMA provides. So I just spoke a couple times about rental assistance. Now, rental assistance is something that FEMA will provide, again, anyone who is willing to leave their property and their property is not safe to live in. We have to provide some proof, right? FEMA will have an inspector come to the house or speak on the phone to the survivor and identify through a series of questions whether rental assistance is needed. This rental assistance will be 2 months worth of rent. 2 months. It will not cover 2 months worth of rent. I guarantee you that, but it'll be better than nothing. So 2 months worth of rent. After 1 month, FEMA will send a follow-up mail, and that will be a form called a Continued Temporary Housing Assistance Form, CTHA form. And that form will be filled out by the survivor, and the survivor will also include rental receipts or temporary lease agreements, utility bills. They might also explain that they still have mortgage payments that they're covering, might explain what their current salary is, all the detail necessary for FEMA to reevaluate the need for rental assistance. They will then at that point make a determination on whether or not the survivor is eligible for another 2 months rent. This will continue every 2 months until the survivor returns to their home, finds another long-term place to live, or 18 months has been reached from the date of the disaster. Okay, so if a survivor remains eligible for assistance, they'll have to renew every 2 months. There is no limit to this fund. Functional needs assistance. Has anyone heard of functional needs assistance? Okay, so a few years ago, FEMA wanted to be a little more equitable. They wanted to make sure that Survivor A and Survivor B, who both had the same style of home, the same amount of damage, but Survivor B had some functional needs, that they were both receiving the same amount of money equitably. So let's say Survivor B has a functional need that requires additional structural components to the home or additional personal property components. So these functional needs could include anything mobility-wise, respiratory, vision, auditory, any cognitive issues, things with age, height, weight, you name it. It runs a huge gamut, and we want to make sure that survivors, when they apply to FEMA, they'll see, do you have a disability? And initially it looks like the only types of disability you can check has to do with mobility. We don't want survivors thinking that's the only type of assistance. So many different types of assistance that FEMA will provide for functional needs. But let's say Survivor B has additional things that are specifically required for their functional needs. FEMA provides both survivors with the same amount of housing assistance award monies and same amount of other needs assistance award monies for both Survivor A and B. But without functional needs assistance monies, Survivor A will most likely bring more improvements to their home than Survivor B, because Survivor B would have to use some of those monies to replace those functional need items. So FEMA, as long as the survivor has made it known that there is functional needs within their household, FEMA can then provide that household with additional funds outside of the housing assistance monies and the other needs assistance monies. Do I have any questions on this? Because it is very important. Okay. Critical needs assistance is a very small nominal amount of money, $700 for this disaster. Every time disasters occur within FEMA's annual change. So every October 1st, the award amounts that FEMA provides change. So for instance, for Kentucky flood survivors, which that occurred in July of last year, their critical needs assistance was $500. California floods get $700. Now, with this, and we're kind of past the deadline for this, but for future disasters, if you don't already know, something I really want you to make sure you're aware of, FEMA generally will say, hurry up and apply for assistance within the first 15 days. And there is a check mark box for the application that identifies critical needs are needed, right? There is a need for this critical assistance. FEMA has a set amount of money for critical needs. And so why it's a 15-day general window is because once those funds run dry, they run dry. So those who apply sooner are more likely to receive this $700 award amount. This cannot be appealed. Critical needs assistance is not appealable. You get it or you don't get it. And I know for sure you might hear some survivors who say, well, my next door neighbor got the $700. Why didn't I? It really is how quickly a survivor applies to FEMA and if they check the box that identifies that they need critical assistance. Okay, I'm going to backtrack to functional needs really quick because Jeremy just asked, how do functional needs funds get assessed? Great question. So when a survivor check marks certain pieces of the application, identifying that there are functional needs, or if you as a survivor's advocate know that there are functional needs within that home, I highly recommend you get on a 3-way call with your survivor and FEMA's helpline to make sure it's reflected in that application. Okay. At this point, FEMA will likely assign a disaster integration specialist to that survivor's home. And that disaster integration specialist will help make sure things proceed forward and might actually even help in a more accelerated fashion, right? But to be able to, assess the functional needs, a lot of times what FEMA requires is doctor's notes. They want to know that there is actually a functional need within the household. We do not send client files a lot of times, and this is per our experience. When we request a survivor to ask their doctor for a note, doctors are very reluctant to send a note and they just send the case files. And we cannot send any of that to FEMA due to HIPAA regulations. So it's really something where we have to push these medical professionals in writing a physical letter saying, John Smith has this functional need and has since X date. And we also need to know if that survivor has insurance, because if insurance covers all the needs for that functional need, FEMA will not assist. That again, insurance and FEMA are duplication of benefits. So we want to make sure that FEMA's grant funding goes to those who really need it. But great question, Jeremy. Do you have any follow-up question from that? You can take yourself off of mute if you do.
No, that was great. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Okay, let's go to housing assistance. So like I mentioned, FEMA's fiscal year starts October 1st through September 30th, right? Because the floods occurred after October 1st, California flood survivors can receive up to $41,000 for housing assistance if they owned and occupied their home at the time of the disaster. Has to be their primary residence. Cannot be a secondary residence at all. And again, it's what is not met by insurance, needs that are not met by insurance. So it can repair or replace, right? Other needs assistance is for homeowners who own and occupy their home, or renters who are occupying that property at the time of the disaster. Other needs assistance is also up to $41,000. So if you're a homeowner, theoretically, in an ideal situation, you could potentially receive up to $82,000 worth of assistance from FEMA, right? but that would be a lot of damage to the home. Other needs assistance includes medical, dental, funeral, childcare, et cetera, types of expenses. The ones I just mentioned are not dependent upon the Small Business Administration. All of that can be distributed without FEMA's need to request the survivor to apply for an SBA loan if that survivor meets other qualifications, which we'll talk about. But in order for these medical, dental, funeral, childcare, et cetera, items, it needs to be identified within the application that these are the survivor's needs. Okay, so it has to be noted within that application. Otherwise, FEMA is not going to provide these funds. Okay, now, the main items that most survivors need assistance with for other needs is personal property, transportation, and moving and storage expenses. And if a survivor meets a household income threshold, FEMA will want that survivor to apply to the SBA to see if they would qualify for a loan. If they do qualify for a loan, none of these things, the personal property, vehicle, transportation, moving and storage expenses, will be covered by FEMA because of duplication of benefits. All right. If they are not approved for a loan, then FEMA will reevaluate and determine what they are eligible for. Now, if a survivor is approved for a loan, they do not need to accept it, but we do want the survivor to apply. Before I move on to the Small Business Administration, any questions about this? Okay.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. So I guess I'm just a little confused because, so the SBA, the Small Business, that's what that stands for, yeah? That, that's for homeowners though.
Yeah, so in my next slide,
the name is just confusing, that's all? Okay.
So confusing, right? Let me pop over to my next slide so I can, oh, wait, maybe not my next slide, the one after. But I will, Sarah, I will answer your question. Irma asked, what was the timeline for all of this, for receiving FEMA approvals in between all these steps? Great question. So here's some of that information. You have 60 days from the date of the declaration, which was January 15th. So we have until March 16th, I believe, to apply for FEMA assistance. We only have about 2 weeks left to apply for FEMA assistance. In yellow are the ways in which you can apply. Again, even if you have insurance, definitely recommend you applying to FEMA. Even if you think, I don't think I need anything, my damages were minimal, I would still apply for FEMA assistance. You might be denied, but we really want you to get a FEMA registration number. FEMA registration number will allow you to appeal at any point after the determination letter is received. So apply within 60 days. Now, after you apply, FEMA has up to 90 days to respond to your application. That's the timeline they give themselves, is 90 days. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more, but they give themselves a tiny 90-day window. After that 90 days, you will likely, you as the survivor, will likely receive a determination letter identifying A, if you were eligible for assistance, and B, how much you were eligible for if you were eligible. FEMA will state generally on page 3 of that determination letter, if you do not agree with this, you can appeal. FEMA will state within that declaration letter on page 3, or determination letter, excuse me, determination letter on page 3, you have about 60 days to appeal if you want to appeal this decision. That's not set in stone. I want you to be very clear of that. It's not set in stone. If it's after the 60 days, we can explain inside the letter why there was a delay, why it's been 4 months since the determination letter that we are applying to FEMA. Something as simple as, I didn't know I was even able to appeal. I didn't know until I met Sarah or Irma or Jeremy, who are helping me in this process. Or I lost all documentation that proves that I own this home. And so I had to go to the city and it took a while, so explaining why there is a delay after the 60 days is all that's needed in the letter. Now, FEMA's overall appeal window is 18 months from the date of the disaster. That means next June, July, I would say probably June 15th of next year is when the appeals window officially closes for this disaster. Okay. Any follow-up questions to that? Okay. Again, can't stress enough to have survivors apply for FEMA assistance. Get that FEMA registration number. Okay. So, SBA. SBA is the Small Business Administration. Now, small business on every other time of the year outside of a disaster. When a federally declared disaster is, when a federal disaster is declared in a community and FEMA has identified the counties in which individual assistance will be provided, that is when the Small Business Administration also assists individuals. So once FEMA comes in to a location, SBA will follow. And the reason being is FEMA and the SBA have partnered together. Again, FEMA is a grant. And as a grant, FEMA wants to make sure those who are most in need receive assistance. So they don't have a way to do background checks, to do credit checks, to do income checks. That's where the SBA comes in. SBA has that ability and the ability to provide really low interest, long-term loans. So if a survivor, again, reaches the threshold of qualifying, in FEMA's eyes, potentially qualifying for an SBA loan, they're going to kick that survivor over and say, hey, we're referring you to the SBA. There are a few things I want you to be aware of. However, I don't know what that limit is. They'll never tell us. They don't tell FEMA what that limit is. But also, if a survivor puts 0 as their household income, FEMA's automatically going to refer them over to the SBA because FEMA's thought process is no one survives off of nothing. So when we're assisting survivors in this application process, we want to make sure that the survivor is counting any food stamps or pension or child, what's the word? Funds that come from
child support.
Thank you. Couldn't remember why I couldn't remember that name. Yes, child support, anything that can help support that household throughout the year financially. We want to identify that within FEMA. We don't want that 0. We don't want survivors who have not filed taxes because they make under $25,000 a year and are not required to file taxes to be referred over to the SBA. The reason being, the SBA utilizes IRS tax information. And if the SBA cannot find taxes from the past few years, then they are automatically going to withdraw the survivor from the application process, and then nothing will move forward. FEMA will not assist with personal property, moving, storage, and transportation until they know that a survivor has been denied a loan from the SBA, not withdrawn or not approved. So we really want to make sure that survivors are putting their accurate amount of money that they're receiving per year. Okay. Now, again, you're going to have survivors who are going to say, well, I don't want to apply to the SBA because I know I'm not going to be approved. And then it's going to ding my credit because there's some other entity checking, et cetera, et cetera. Understand all those concerns. We understand all of it, but we want to really encourage these survivors to apply, because without that loan denial from the SBA, those key vital pieces of recovery, personal property, moving and storage, and transportation, will definitely not be assisted by either the SBA or FEMA. If you are approved for a loan, you don't need to accept it. It's just that FEMA will not provide personal property, moving, storage, transportation expenses due to duplication of benefits. Okay, this is what the SBA provides. 0% interest first year of the loan. This just kickstarted, I want to say within the last 6-ish months, which is pretty great. For homeowners, again, primary residents, you can receive up to a $200,000 loan. Unlike FEMA, where $41,000 is most likely not going to bring your home back to that pre-disaster condition, FEMA's only goal is to bring your home back to a safe, sanitary, functional condition. An SBA loan can help bring that home back to that pre-disaster condition, right? For renters, survivors can receive up to a $40,000 loan. Term lengths are between 15 to 30 years, and interest rates are anywhere right now, from things I've heard, between 2.18% to 4% based off of credit. You can negotiate, always negotiate with an SBA loan. Cannot be used for secondary homes whatsoever. However, if it's a rental unit and you're a landlord, you might qualify for a loan, because if you don't have insurance on your rental property, you need a loan to be able to repair that, to allow your tenants to come back in. It's kind of small business-y. That may qualify. And it cannot be used to upgrade homes unless it's required by local building codes. One other thing I want to express in this SBA and duplication of benefits. Let's say you do qualify for FEMA assistance, which is fantastic, and you're a homeowner, and insurance may have provided you or may not have provided you with money, but FEMA provided you with money, right? It's not enough money to bring your home back to that pre-disaster condition, so you want to see if you can get a loan. And SBA is most likely the lowest interest and longest term length that you will find. You can apply to the SBA for a loan. And the SBA, again, can provide you a loan of up to $200,000 based off of extent of damage. So let's say you are this survivor. You received total for home repair and personal property, transportation, moving, storage, and rental assistance, $50,000 from FEMA. Let's pretend $50,000 what you received from FEMA. And the SBA comes to you and says, yes, you can get a loan of up to $200,000 because you're a homeowner. What SBA will then do is they will deduct the $50,000 that you received from FEMA to avoid that duplication of benefits. So the loan that you will then receive is $150,000. But let's say you only need $100,000 of a loan because you receive some charitable contributions, then you can negotiate for a lower loan. Does all of that make sense? I want to ask if that makes sense before I move on. Okay. Duplication of benefits. These are the three main entities that are concerned with duplication of benefits. If you have charitable funds, your own grant funds that you are able to assist survivors with, you don't need to worry about duplication of benefits if FEMA also provides that assistance. FEMA is really looking between the SBA and insurance. Again, apply immediately to the SBA if referred. And for insurance, if that settlement is less than the maximum award amount that FEMA provided and damages exceed what insurance provides, then you can apply to FEMA. Or if insurance does not cover some key components that FEMA does cover, you can also apply to FEMA. 10 minutes left. Yes, I'm going to speed through this. I apologize. Other sources of our assistance are listed right here. I'm not going to go into detail. And really quickly, want you to review this. Note, secondary homes do not qualify for assistance. Owners who own and occupy the home or renters who occupy the residence only. A lot of individuals in California who were directly affected by the floods might be undocumented migrants. Now, if this undocumented migrant has a child who was born in the United States, that is enough to qualify that household for additional assistance. That minor child who's living in the household who is a US citizen can be placed in the primary registrants field. So primary applicant will be the child with the social security number. The parent of that child will be the co-applicant. Both, just letting you know, both primary and co-applicants can interact with FEMA. So the child will be the primary applicant because they have the social security number, but the co-applicant as the parent will be the one to communicate with FEMA. Very important, ICE is not allowed to view FEMA applications. However, if for some reason it ends up occurring, applicants do have legal recourse as long as they filled out that application correctly. And then this is just a list of individuals who do not qualify for assistance. Again, these slides will be presented to you that you can look at that in more detail. Items needed for registration: social security number or an identification. List all applicants within that household. Reason being, safe, sanitary, and functional is FEMA's #1 thing. If you only state yourself as the applicant, but there are 5 other people living in your home, you will likely only receive funds to cover one person. If there are 4 bedrooms and there are 6 individuals living in the house, you plus 5 others, but you only put yourself, FEMA is only going to cover the cost of one bedroom that was damaged, even though there are 4 bedrooms that are all occupied. So list all occupants. Contact information, very important, especially for those who are transient because they're not living in their home. Make sure FEMA is aware of the most up-to-date and correct mailing address. Contact FEMA regularly to make sure that mailing address is updated. Important vital documents are mailed to survivors. And if the survivor is not able to access their mailbox, they're missing out on continued temporary housing assistance forms. They're potentially missing out on FEMA checks if they have not done a direct deposit, et cetera, et cetera. Household income, already spoken about. Bank information for direct deposits. Insurance information, very important to put all insurance information there. Again, survivors likely going to be denied, but we, in that point, appeal once a settlement has been received or a denial has been made by insurance. List of damages to the home, any needs, like we've already discussed, and proof of ownership and occupancy, which includes something as simple as a utility bill for occupancy or a bank statement, or A receipt of major home repair that has occurred within the past 5 years from the date of the disaster. So if an HVAC unit was repaired, that's enough to prove that you own their home. Or if you pay property tax, if your name is not on the title. Okay, FEMA is going to try contacting the survivor after registration and ask if the home is safe to live in. If a survivor says yes, FEMA is going to come back with a letter saying ineligible because the home is safe. Survivors are going to be living in their home whether there's mold, whether there's holes in their roof, because they have nowhere else to go. So always make sure if there is a need for assistance, the survivor says no, or I'm not sure if my home is safe to live in. Okay. FEMA is going to try to contact the survivors 3 times. If they're unable to reach that survivor, the survivor will be removed from the program. So our recommendation is to weekly call FEMA and say, hey, has anyone tried calling me? Just to make sure that you're not denied and then have to go through this whole process. Okay. Appealing FEMA. This is a determination letter. A denial or ineligibility does not mean necessarily that you are not eligible. We, again, have assisted over 400 survivors, and the average award amount that they receive in addition to their initial award amount is about $7,800 to $7,900. So again, just because you receive this doesn't mean you're not eligible. Need to appeal. In appealing FEMA, you need to write letters that are very short, really just highlight the exact needs. I'm appealing my home repair assistant or determination. I did not have insurance, or my insurance did not provide me with sufficient needs. I have contractor estimates showing that my damages exceed what FEMA has provided. Please reconsider me for additional home repair assistance. That's it, nothing else. You know, keep it really sweet, just to the point. Include identifying information, name, FEMA registration number, et cetera, on every single page of the appeal, including the letter, and add definitely word by word this binding statement. That's your notarized, that's your self-notarization. Include every single document that you can, this is where you want to be really detailed, to substantiate your claims. Contractor estimates, insurance settlement, proof of occupancy documents, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure you're accurate. We always have second eyes. File appeals according to appeal type. So if your survivor needs housing assistance and personal property, do not combine that into one appeal, because it's 2 separate buckets that FEMA pulls from, right? So separate appeals per appeal type. And don't submit photos, because FEMA's internal computer system is not great, and it makes photos very grainy, just mucks up the system. In the box to the yellow are ways in which you can upload the appeals. And what I can do, and did not have time to do, if anybody's interested, is I can go into appeals in more detail at a later date. So are there any questions about what I have discussed?
I would be very interested in a further tutorial on appeals.
Right.
Yeah, and thank you. This is already some very helpful stuff that I wish I had known prior.
Irma.
Yeah, I would just ask about, in real life, how does this work? It seems pretty complex and daunting. And I'm imagining for people who are stressed, maybe don't have, aren't very fluent in language or self-advocacy, that it's, a very even more complicated process. So in your experience, do you literally assign someone a case manager and handhold them through? And as a volunteer or as a community organization, is that something we should be kind of considering, how this is not just here's some forms, and a chart. This is like, we're going to have to do some really hands-on help for people in the community. And we need to, so what, I know you probably can't quantify it too much. Yeah. Okay.
So 4% of survivors appeal. 4, because of all the things that you mentioned. My program, we're a nonprofit program, grant funded. I have a team of associates who are assigned different disasters. Our process is very hands-off for the survivor. We do a short intake, about 20 minutes. We speak to FEMA to identify through FEMA volunteer agency liaisons to identify what items are missing on FEMA's end so that we know what materials that definitely need to be included in that appeal. We request these documents from the survivor. So with the survivor, it's the intake and providing documentation. Then with our grant funds, and this will be different for you based off of what grant funding that you have, we are able to secure contractor estimates for the survivor, right? So we're able to partner with contractors who we then assign out, and we receive these estimates, which are a needed component for homeowners for appeals. And then we compile that, we draft the letter, we compile everything, then we send that off to the survivor to review and sign. Once that's signed, we then send it off to FEMA, and we follow that survivor throughout, or follow that appeal throughout its process with FEMA until a determination is made. So it's very hands-off for the survivor because it is so complicated, so daunting. And most of the times these survivors are like, I give up, I can't do it anymore. I need someone else to do it for me. Great question though. I see some in the chat really quick. All right, perfect.
If you do have any questions that you think of later, I'm sure we can send them to Claire and Mackenzie via email and get some answers out to this group as well. And we will also be sending the recording and all of the slides, which have really good information and details on them, to everyone who registered today. So thank you so much to Claire and Mackenzie. This was a great presentation. I keep learning more. And to those participants today, please reach out to me, and I can also, is it okay to send out your emails in the follow-up, Claire and Mackenzie, or would you prefer, what do you prefer?
Yeah, definitely. And I know Mackenzie will say yes too.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.